Shocker. Imagine my surprise. Just imagine my surprise when Uncle Casey found out that the WNBA is struggling to maintain their ratings without Caitlin Clark. To make matters worse, and this is something I have definitely noticed in the last 3 or 4 weeks, especially since the All-Star game.
The WNBA just got hit with the most brutal wake-up call in sports history, and the numbers are absolutely devastating. Picture this: one groin injury completely destroys what the league called their historic growth season. We're talking about a collapse so dramatic that it makes you question everything they've been telling us about women's basketball's so-called breakthrough moment. Here's the reality that has network executives scrambling behind closed doors. When Caitlin Clark stepped onto that court for the first Fever vs. Sky matchup this season, 2.7 million people tuned in. The numbers peaked at 3.1 million viewers, shattering records and making everyone believe the WNBA had finally cracked the code. Fast forward to their most recent meeting without Clark, and barely 1.3 million people bothered to watch.
And that problem is Caitlin Clark not playing in WNBA games. Now, what all does this affect? The ratings are plummeting. Guys, there's ratings for a couple of these games that are eye-poppingly bad. We're talking about down in unrivaled territory.
That's not just a drop, that's a freefall that exposes the league's entire business model as a house of cards. The most shocking part: this isn't some gradual decline over months. We're witnessing over 1.4 million viewers vanishing in a matter of weeks. Television networks don't just notice those kinds of numbers, they panic over them. When ESPN, CBS, and ABC see viewership crater the moment your biggest star sits out, they start making phone calls that no league wants to receive. But here's where it gets really disturbing. The league knew this was coming, and they tried to manipulate fans with the oldest trick in the sports book. Just yesterday, Clark was listed as a game-time decision for tonight's matchup against Dallas. Fans got excited, social media buzzed, and for a brief moment it looked like the ratings savior might return. Then reality hit like a freight train. Coach Stephanie White dropped a bombshell that Clark hadn't even been practicing with the team. Not limited practice, not modified drills, nothing. Yet somehow, the WNBA marketing machine wanted everyone to believe she might suit up and save their plummeting numbers. It's the kind of desperate move that screams panic from the front office, and it's exactly what happens when your entire league depends on one person showing up to work.
Be struggling to maintain interest. Now, in fairness to the dump, the ratings I'm about to share with you guys, they're not bad. Matter of fact, some of them are actually good, at least when compared to what this dump used to draw, which was nothing. But the reason I think the WNBA is in trouble has less to do with these ratings and more to do with what I think is coming.
The manipulation doesn't stop there. For weeks, Clark's injury timeline has been a masterclass in mixed messaging. First, she was day-to-day, then indefinitely out. ESPN circled August 12th as her return date, only for that to come and go without explanation. The constant teasing, the fake hope, the dangling of her potential return, it's all designed to keep viewers from completely abandoning ship. What makes this even more infuriating is how predictable it all was. The warning signs weren't subtle hints, they were neon billboards flashing danger. Every week, Clark took harder hits than NFL receivers while getting fewer calls than a telemarketer in airplane mode. The league watched their golden goose get targeted game after game, and instead of protecting their most valuable asset, they let it continue until the inevitable happened. Now they're paying the price in the most public way possible. Games that used to draw over 2 million viewers are struggling to crack 1.4 million, even with primetime slots and major network coverage. The so-called growth that dominated headlines for months has been exposed as nothing more than one player's magnetic pull on casual sports fans. This groin injury didn't just magically appear out of thin air, and what really happened behind the scenes will make your blood boil. The WNBA spent an entire season watching their biggest investment get systematically targeted, and not only did they allow it to continue, they actively covered up just how bad things had gotten. Let's talk about the elephant in the room that nobody wants to acknowledge. Clark wasn't just taking normal basketball contact, she was absorbing punishment that would make professional enforcers wince. We're talking about landing space violations that went uncalled, arm grabs on drives that officials pretended not to see, and clear hacks at the rim that somehow became good defense in the referee's handbook. Here's what makes this absolutely infuriating. The league had a blueprint for disaster, and they followed it perfectly. You don't develop a groin injury from one awkward step or a simple collision. This type of soft tissue damage comes from weeks of accumulated punishment. constant physical contact, and a body that's been pushed beyond its limits without proper protection from the officials who are supposed to maintain competitive balance. The most damning evidence. Compare Clark's whistle to what other star players receive in this league. When Paige Bickers gets touched, referees blow their whistles like they're conducting a symphony.
Regular season. And the craziest thing about this last groin injury with Caitlin Clark is how it's been covered. The day after she had the groin injury, she was listed as day-to-day. And then a couple weeks after that, then she was listed to being out indefinitely. Now, ESPN had August 12th as the circled return date for Caitlin Clark to get back onto the court. And just yesterday, she was listed as a game time decision for today's game against the Dallas Wings. And then after practice yesterday, Coach Stephanie White basically came out and said, like, no, Caitlin Clark hasn't even been practicing. So they changed it from a game time decision to her being out.
When Aja Wilson drives to the basket, defenders know they can't breathe on her without consequences. But Clark, she's been treated like a rookie walk-on at an open gym, absorbing contact that would send other players to the free throw line 10 times per game. This isn't just poor officiating, it's a systematic failure that borders on negligence. The league's most marketable player, the person responsible for their record-breaking television numbers and sold-out arenas, was getting mauled on a nightly basis while commissioners and officials turned a blind eye.
And I get it to a certain extent. The fans, the media does not need to know every little thing that's going on with Caitlin Clark's injuries, especially a star player like that. We will never know all the information, nor should we know all the information. And that's actually good for Caitlin. It protects her for when she does come back on the court. She can't be targeted. Teams can't use a certain injury or ailment against her if people don't really know what is going on. But the reporting of her timeline in general, there has been no rhyme or reason to what has been shared about it. To put her as a game time decision for today's game, and then Coach Stephanie White basically coming out and saying she has done no practicing with the team, that's crazy. And I brought it up in my video yesterday.
They had one job: protect the asset that was single-handedly carrying their entire product to unprecedented heights. But here's where the cover-up gets really ugly. Behind closed doors, team executives knew exactly what was happening. They watched game film showing blatant fouls going uncalled. They saw the cumulative damage building week after week. Yet instead of demanding better protection for the player who was making everyone rich, they stayed silent and hoped nothing catastrophic would happen. The targeting wasn't even subtle. Opposing teams developed game plans specifically designed to wear Clark down physically. They knew the referees weren't going to protect her, so why not test the boundaries? Every hard screen, every unnecessary shove, every cheap shot became part of the strategy to neutralize the player who was bringing unprecedented attention to women's basketball. What's even more disgusting is how league officials tried to spin the narrative. When fans and media started questioning the physical play,
throw her back in the mix when all of these teams are at peak condition. And we already know what happens when Caitlin Clark gets back out on the court. Teams play defense on her differently. They play extra physical with her. There's all of these different factors that come into play. That's why I'm sort of leaning to the point of maybe Caitlin should be out for the rest of the season. Maybe this season is just done for her. Maybe it doesn't make sense for her to come back into the mix if the Fever aren't contenders. Are the Fever contenders at this point? I'm just not so sure. Do you risk another injury that can again compound and turn into something else down the line?
The WNBA's response was to gaslight everyone into believing this was just playoff intensity or welcome to professional basketball. They painted anyone raising concerns as overprotective or not understanding the game, all while their golden goose was getting pounded into an inevitable injury. The financial implications of this negligence are staggering. Every game Clark misses cost the league millions in television revenue, merchandise sales, and ticket prices. The Indiana Fever went from selling out every arena to playing in front of crowds that looked disinterested without their main attraction. Sponsors who signed deals based on Clark's drawing power are now questioning their investments. But the real crime isn't just financial, it's the complete betrayal of competitive integrity. The WNBA allowed their most valuable player to become a punching bag, and now everyone is paying the price for that cowardice. Right now in conference rooms across ESPN, CBS, and ABC headquarters, executives are having conversations that would make WNBA commissioners break out in cold sweats. These aren't casual discussions about programming schedules. These are emergency meetings about whether women's basketball is actually worth the massive investments they've been making. The numbers tell a story that no amount of spin can fix. When network executives signed those television deals, they were banking on sustained growth and consistent viewership that could justify premium advertising rates. Instead, they're watching their most expensive programming collapse faster than a house of cards the moment one player gets injured. That's not sustainable television, that's a liability waiting to happen. Here's what's really happening behind closed doors that the WNBA doesn't want you to know. Television contracts aren't just about current ratings, they're about predictable audience delivery that advertisers can count on. When your marquee matchup loses over 1 million viewers in a matter of months, major brands start questioning whether their advertising dollars are being wasted on an unreliable product. The panic is real and is spreading through the entire sports media landscape. ESPN did invest millions in WNBA coverage, expecting to broadcast games that struggled to break 200,000 viewers on their cable networks. CBS didn't clear primetime slots for matchups that can't even match last year's disappointing numbers. These networks have alternatives, and right now those alternatives are looking a lot more appealing than women's basketball without its biggest draw.
But here's the most devastating part for the WNBA's future. Networks don't forget when they get burned. The league spent months promising unprecedented growth, historic viewership, and a product that could compete with major sports programming. Instead, they delivered a cautionary tale about putting all your eggs in one very fragile basket.
The casual viewer exodus is the real killer, and network researchers know it. These aren't hardcore basketball fans who'll watch regardless of who's playing. These are mainstream sports consumers who discovered the WNBA through Caitlin Clark's magnetic personality and incredible play. Every week she's sidelined, these viewers are forming new habits, finding other entertainment, and forgetting that women's basketball even exists. Television executives understand audience psychology better than anyone, and they know that breaking viewer habits is exponentially harder than maintaining them. When someone stops watching your product for a month, there's no guarantee they'll return even when the star comes back. Attention spans are short, competition is fierce, and loyalty in modern media consumption is practically non-existent. The advertising implications are equally catastrophic. Major brands don't just buy commercial time, they buy guaranteed audience demographics that justify their marketing spend. When viewership becomes completely unpredictable based on one player's health status, advertisers start demanding refunds and renegotiating deals. That's exactly the nightmare scenario that keeps network executives awake at night. What makes this situation even more insulting to television partners is how preventable it all was. Networks invested in the WNBA believing the league would protect their most valuable content creator. Instead, they watched helplessly as poor officiating and league negligence systematically destroyed the very asset that made their investment worthwhile in the first place. The whispers in media circles are getting louder, and they're not favorable to women's basketball. Industry insiders are questioning whether the WNBA's growth was genuine or just a temporary phenomenon built around one transcendent player.
Should not be thrown back into any mix if she doesn't have significant practices under her belt before she goes into game speed. You can try to simulate game speed as much as you want in practice. You will never be able to. Game speed is game speed. There's also a lot more adrenaline, all of these different things pumping when you're playing in front of a sold out crowd that the Indiana Fever do every single night. If I'm their coach, she needs to practice for at minimum a week. At the minimum, she needs to be doing everything in practice for at least a week before you throw her back in the mix. Now, you're going to throw her back in the mix when all of these teams are at peak condition.
When your entire product's value hinges on a single person's availability, that's not a league, that's a traveling circus that forgot to protect its star performer. Network commitment for future seasons is now seriously in question, and the implications extend far beyond just television coverage. What we're witnessing isn't just a temporary setback, it's the complete exposure of a business model so fundamentally flawed that it threatens the entire future of women's professional basketball. The WNBA has accidentally created the most dangerous situation possible in professional sports: total dependency on a single asset that they failed to protect. This goes way deeper than just television ratings or ticket sales. We're talking about a systemic failure that reveals how hollow the league's supposed growth really was. Think about it. If your entire product collapses the moment one player gets injured, were you ever actually building a sustainable business? Or were you just riding a temporary wave that was always destined to crash? The scariest part for everyone involved is what happens when Caitlin Clark eventually decides she's had enough. And let's be brutally honest here, why wouldn't she? She spent an entire season getting targeted, receiving minimal protection from officials, and watching the league profit massively from her star power while doing absolutely nothing to ensure her long-term health and safety. That's not a partnership, that's exploitation with a basketball attached. Here's the nightmare scenario that keeps WNBA executives awake at night. Clark decides the physical punishment isn't worth it and walks away from professional basketball entirely. Maybe she pursues overseas opportunities where star players actually get protected. Maybe she transitions to media, coaching, or business ventures that don't require her to absorb punishment that would be illegal in most other professional sports. The financial devastation would be immediate and irreversible. Season ticket holders would demand refunds. Television contracts would get renegotiated at fractions of their current value. Merchandise sales would crater. Sponsorship deals would evaporate. The entire infrastructure built around women's basketball would collapse faster than anyone thought possible. But even if Clark returns healthy and motivated, the damage to the league's credibility is already done. Casual fans have now seen behind the curtain, and what they've discovered is deeply unsettling. The WNBA's historic growth wasn't actually league-wide improvement, it was one player single-handedly dragging an otherwise struggling product into mainstream relevance. The other players in the league are starting to understand this reality too, and it's creating internal tensions that threaten competitive balance. How do you maintain team chemistry and league purity when everyone knows that 90% of the attention, revenue, and media coverage revolves around one person? Other talented players are questioning why they should continue grinding for a product that barely acknowledges their existence. This dependency crisis has also exposed the league's complete failure in player development and marketing. They had months to build storylines around other compelling athletes, create rivalries that could sustain interest, and develop multiple stars who could carry the league through difficult periods. Instead, they put everything on Clark and prayed nothing would go wrong. The international implications are equally devastating for women's basketball globally. The WNBA was supposed to be the premier destination for female athletes worldwide, but this crisis has shown that the league's success was built on quicksand. International players and their agents are now questioning whether American professional basketball is actually a stable, long-term career option. What makes this situation absolutely inexcusable is how easily it could have been prevented. Proper officiating, basic player protection, and competent marketing of multiple stars would have created a foundation that could withstand any single player's absence. Instead, the WNBA chose the lazy path of riding one person's coattails and hoping for the best. The clock is ticking on this entire experiment, and the margin for error has essentially disappeared. If Clark's return doesn't immediately restore viewership to previous levels, it will confirm everyone's worst fears about the league's artificial growth. If she gets injured again due to continued targeting, it could be the final nail in the coffin for women's professional basketball's mainstream relevance. The ultimate question isn't whether the WNBA can survive without Caitlin Clark, it's whether they deserve to survive after proving they're incapable of protecting the very asset that made their success possible. And right now, the answer to that question is looking more damning by the day.